What would you do if the roar of a deadly canyon flood swallowed every sound around you, and yet, through that chaos, you heard a fragile life crying for help, fading with every second as if the storm itself was trying to erase it forever? The canyon had always been a place of silence, a place where wind whispered against stone and time moved slowly across jagged limestone walls, but today it was alive with violence, with the kind of raw, uncontrollable force that turned nature into something terrifyingly indifferent. The sky above was suffocatingly low, heavy storm clouds pressing down like a weight that refused to lift, turning the daylight into a dim gray haze that barely reached the canyon floor. Rain hammered down in relentless sheets, striking the rocks, feeding the rising flood that surged through the narrow passage like a living creature, angry, unpredictable, unstoppable. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth, cold stone, and something metallic, something that clung to the back of the throat and made every breath feel sharper, heavier. Water churned violently below, thick and brown, filled with debris, broken branches, scattered stones, fragments of the canyon itself being torn apart piece by piece. And in the middle of that chaos, barely visible against a jagged outcrop of rock, was a small, trembling figure fighting for its life. The Labradoodle Pup didn't belong here. Its soft, soaked fur clung tightly to its fragile body, its limbs shaking uncontrollably as it struggled to maintain even the smallest grip against the slick limestone. Its eyes were wide with fear, pure, instinctive terror, as the current slammed against it again and again, each wave threatening to rip it free and drag it into the violent depths below. Its cries were weak now, almost lost beneath the deafening roar of the flood, but they were there, sharp, desperate, refusing to fade completely. It was the kind of sound that cut through everything, the kind that reached places inside a person that couldn't be ignored, no matter how much they wanted to turn away. At the edge of the canyon, standing still against the storm, was a man who had spent years learning how to ignore sounds like that. His boots were planted firmly against the wet rock, but the rest of him felt distant, disconnected, as if part of him wasn't fully there. The rain soaked through his clothes, ran down his face, mixed with the cold air that cut into his lungs with every steady, controlled breath. His eyes were fixed on the struggling pup, but there was something behind that gaze, something deeper, something heavier than the moment in front of him. Years of silence had shaped him into someone who didn't react quickly anymore, someone who observed, calculated, held back. He had lived through chaos before, had faced situations where every second demanded action, where hesitation meant loss, and every choice carried consequences that never truly faded. That life had taken something from him, something he had never gotten back. So he had left it behind. Or at least, he thought he had. Now, standing at the edge of this canyon, with the storm roaring around him and the sound of that desperate cry cutting through everything, he realized something he hadn't expected. You don't really leave those things behind. They wait. And when the moment comes, they come back. Beside him stood a German shepherd, motionless but alert, its presence grounded in a way that contrasted sharply with the chaos surrounding them. Its fur was soaked, darkened by the rain, its body tense but controlled, every muscle ready, every sense focused. Its ears were angled forward, its eyes locked onto the trapped pup with an intensity that didn't waver. There was no hesitation in that gaze, no internal conflict, no weight of the past holding it back. There was only clarity. Purpose. The dog shifted slightly, stepping closer to the edge, its claws scraping lightly against the wet stone. It didn't look away from the pup, but it didn't need to. The connection between it and the man didn't rely on eye contact. It was something quieter. Something built over time. Over shared moments where words weren't needed, where understanding existed without explanation. The shepherd knew what had to be done. And it was waiting. The flood surged higher, slamming violently against the canyon walls, the sound echoing like distant explosions trapped within stone. The waterline climbed visibly now, swallowing rocks that had been exposed moments before, erasing any sense of stability. The current wasn't just strong, it was escalating, fed by the relentless storm above, growing more dangerous with every passing second. The pup slipped again. This time, it almost didn't recover. Its small body vanished beneath the surface for a brief, terrifying moment before reappearing, scrambling weakly against the rock, its strength fading rapidly. Its cries were softer now, broken, barely audible. It was running out of time. The shepherd tensed. And then, without waiting for a command, it moved. It launched itself forward in a powerful leap, its body cutting through the rain as it disappeared over the edge and into the raging water below. The impact was immediate, the current smashing into it with brutal force, trying to twist it away, to throw it off course. But the dog didn't panic. It adapted instantly, angling its body, using controlled, powerful strokes to navigate the chaos, not fighting the water head-on, but working with it, cutting diagonally across the current to close the distance faster. For a brief moment, the man didn't move. Not because he didn't know what to do, but because he did. And knowing meant remembering. The roar of the canyon grew louder, deeper, as if reacting to the decision that had just been made. The shepherd was already halfway there, its movements precise despite the violence surrounding it. The pup let out one more weak cry, its body slipping dangerously close to being pulled under again. And just like that, hesitation ended. The man stepped forward. The cold hit instantly, sharp, brutal, unforgiving, as the water surged around his legs, climbing rapidly, pushing with a force that threatened to knock him off balance before he could even adjust. His breath caught for a split second, the shock cutting through him like ice, but it didn't last. His body reacted faster than his thoughts, muscle memory taking over, guiding every movement with a precision he hadn't used in years. He moved into the current deliberately, lowering his stance, shifting his weight to absorb the force instead of resisting it directly. The water surged higher, reaching his waist, then his chest, each step forward harder than the last as the current intensified, fed by the storm above. Ahead, the shepherd reached the rock. It braced itself against the jagged surface, claws digging in as best as they could against the slick limestone. The pup was barely holding on now, its body shaking uncontrollably, its movements weak, uncoordinated. The dog moved carefully, precisely, its jaws opening just enough to grip the loose collar around the pup's neck without causing harm. The current slammed into them both. Hard. For a moment, it looked like they would both be torn away. But the shepherd held. And now, the man was almost there. The distance closed slowly, painfully, every step fought against a force that didn't want to let him pass. The cold was no longer just a sensation, it was a weight, dragging at his limbs, trying to slow him down, trying to weaken him. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Because just as he reached the rock, a new sound rose from deep within the canyon. Lower. Heavier. More dangerous. He froze for a fraction of a second. Because he recognized it instantly. And when he looked upstream, his expression hardened. The flood wasn't just rising anymore. Something much worse was coming. The sound rolling down from upstream did not belong to ordinary rainwater. It was heavier than that, deeper than that, like a mountain had suddenly decided to move and everything in its path would now be crushed beneath its will. The man knew the difference immediately. Years earlier, in places far from this canyon, he had learned that danger always had a voice before it showed its face. Gunfire had one kind of sound. Rotors beating through black skies had another. An ambush had its own silence right before it began. And floodwater, real floodwater, the kind born from cloudbursts and narrow rock and gravity with nowhere else to go, had a voice that came in layers. First the rushing surge. Then the shifting debris. Then, when it became truly lethal, that low, rolling thunder that said the first wave had only been a warning. What was coming now was the real force. What was coming now could strip bark from trees, tear stone loose from canyon walls, and drag anything living into dark water so violently that rescue would become recovery, and recovery would become memory. He felt that truth settle into his bones as his fingers locked around the cold limestone and he hauled himself the last half step toward the outcrop where the German shepherd was braced against the raging current, jaws carefully gripping the soaked collar of the half-drowned Labradoodle pup. The shepherd's eyes flashed toward him for only an instant, but that instant was enough. The dog had already understood the same thing. They were out of time. The pup was trembling so hard its whole body shook in broken spasms, tiny paws scraping uselessly at the stone while the current smashed into its side and sent muddy spray over its face. It was exhausted to the point of collapse. Its breathing came in frantic little bursts that were barely breaths at all. One more strong hit from the water and it would be gone. The man slid closer, wedging one shoulder against a knife-edge protrusion in the canyon wall, using his own body to split the force of the water before it struck the two dogs. The impact jolted through him so violently his teeth clicked together. The cold had already eaten through his legs and into his hips, but pain still came through sharp and immediate. Good. Pain meant response. Response meant he was still in the fight. He reached one arm toward the trapped pup, slow and controlled despite the chaos, knowing one panicked movement could make the little animal jerk away or lose what little purchase it had left. The pup flinched at first, eyes white with terror, then froze when his hand reached the scruff of its neck and the soaked harness strap tangled beneath its chest. Small. Too small. The body in his grip felt lighter than it should have, like fear and cold had already hollowed it out. The shepherd eased its bite the moment the man had a secure hold, but it did not release entirely. Smart. It understood that in this current, one point of contact was not enough. Together they stabilized the pup between them, man and dog sharing the weight against water that wanted all three. Above them, rain struck the canyon rim in hard silver lines. Down in the narrow channel, that rain became brown violence. A branch shot past, collided with the wall, snapped in half, and vanished downstream. Pebbles and small stones bounced along the current with enough force to bruise or break. The man looked toward the nearest shelf of rock on the opposite side, judging distance, angle, flow. Too far in this surge. Downstream, the canyon pinched tighter, becoming a chute where the flood accelerated into white, boiling froth. No chance there either. Upstream was impossible. The only thing worse than going with a flood was trying to fight it head-on inside a stone corridor where footing vanished by the second. He knew all this at once, almost without thought. Training had once taught him how to read danger with speed because hesitation killed. Retirement had not erased that. It had only buried it beneath years of silence, routine, and refusal. That refusal had started after the last mission. He never spoke about it, not to anyone, because language made things real in a way memory somehow didn't. But certain nights still returned whether he wanted them to or not, rotor wash whipping up dust in the dark, radio chatter tight with urgency, boots hitting earth, the smell of cordite, concrete, blood, and smoke, then confusion, a breach, shouting, a split-second call, and afterward the kind of stillness no one should ever have to carry home. He had survived, which had somehow felt less like a blessing than an accusation. Men better than him had not. Men with families, with plans, with futures as ordinary and precious as sunlight through a kitchen window. He had come back with all his limbs and none of his peace. The world called him decorated. He felt only unfinished. So he disappeared into places like this, into landscapes too old and harsh to care what a man had done or failed to do. He told himself he preferred the company of wind, rock, and long miles of trail. The truth was uglier. Solitude asked nothing of him. Solitude never looked at him with the expectation that he could save something. Then the German shepherd had entered his life when he wasn't looking for it. Not a puppy, not a sentimental choice, not some clean beginning. The dog had come to him scarred and alert, passed through hands that mentioned discipline, intelligence, difficult transitions, and the usual phrases people use when they are describing pain without admitting it. The first weeks had been distance and observation. The dog did not trust quickly, and neither did he. But in the long quiet of dawn hikes and cold campsites, in the mutual habit of listening before reacting, something had grown between them. The shepherd learned the weight of his silences. He learned the language in the dog's posture, the difference between curiosity and warning, between calm and readiness, between ordinary attention and the kind that meant something invisible had shifted in the world around them. They became, without ever discussing it, a pair built out of what remained after loss. And now here they were, in a flooded canyon with a dying pup between them, every buried instinct in both of them pulled violently back to the surface. The upstream roar deepened again. He risked a glance around the bend and saw it, not clearly, not all at once, but enough. The water surface changed before the wave itself arrived. The flood drew strange for a split second, sucking lower around jutting rocks and exposing slick edges that should have remained submerged. Then debris began to come faster, sticks, foam, a dark shape that might have been part of a trunk. The shepherd felt the shift and flattened lower to the rock, a warning rumble vibrating through its chest. The man did not need more confirmation. He tucked the pup against his own chest, using one forearm beneath its belly and one hand over its shoulders so its head stayed high and clear of the spray. It was shivering so violently now he could feel the tremors through his sleeve. The shepherd released the collar fully and repositioned, turning downstream, waiting for direction. There was no safe option, only the least fatal one. "We move now," he said, though his voice vanished under the flood almost the moment it left him. The words were not for the pup. They were not even really for the dog. They were for himself, a command thrown into the storm because commands gave structure to fear. The moment he pushed off from the rock, the canyon struck. The current seized his legs and yanked them downstream, trying to spin him broadside and drive him into the wall. He compensated instantly, turning his hips with the force instead of against it, kicking hard, keeping the pup high against his chest. The shepherd launched beside him, not a head this time but half a body length offset, exactly where a disciplined partner would be, close enough to aid, far enough not to collide. Water blasted over them in muddy sheets. The canyon walls blurred. Breath became timing: turn, inhale, brace, turn, exhale, kick. The man's shoulder slammed rock and fire ran down his arm, but he kept hold. The pup yelped once, weakly, then went limp again except for the frantic beating of its heart. A narrow V-shaped current line formed ahead where two flows collided around a submerged boulder. Dead center was lethal. Left side would pin them against the wall. Right side offered a thin seam of slightly softer water if he hit it exactly. He angled for it with 3 brutal strokes, using the kind of tactical swim movement his body had not performed in years and yet remembered with humiliating clarity. The shepherd matched him, ears slicked back, mouth barely above the water, eyes fixed not on the shore but on him. They crossed the seam in a spray of foam and nearly lost it when a hidden undertow grabbed his knees. For one awful second the world tipped. The canyon wall rushed toward his face. His boots found nothing. The pup slid in his grip. Then the shepherd was there, shoulder striking his ribs hard enough to reset his balance, not with sentimental intention but with practical force. It bought him half a second. Half a second was enough. He drove his free hand against the wall, pushed away, and regained the line. The flood rounded a bend and the light changed. The canyon narrowed so abruptly it felt like entering the throat of something alive. The walls rose sheer and dark, slick with runoff, and the water accelerated between them until the whole channel became a writhing chute. There would be no climbing out here. No ledges. No banks. No second chances. The air was colder in this section, robbed of warmth by shadow and stone. The sound became so loud it stopped sounding like water altogether and turned into pure pressure, a constant assault that rattled the ribs. The man felt the first true bite of fatigue in his lower back and thighs. Cold and force were adding up. He measured the distance to the next visible widening and knew he needed a plan before his body made one for him by failing. The widening appeared briefly 50 feet ahead, a swirl zone where the canyon opened just enough for eddies to form behind a cluster of broken limestone slabs. It might hold for a moment. It might also trap them in recirculating water that could keep dragging them down and back. Better than the chute. Maybe. He committed to it because survival often looked exactly like that, not certainty, just a faster decision than the thing trying to kill you. He pointed with his chin. The shepherd adjusted instantly. Together they angled hard across the current, taking impact after impact as the flood fought to deny them even a slight change of course. The pup stirred in his arms, coughing water, eyes fluttering but not focusing. "Stay," he muttered, a useless word and somehow the only one that came. "Stay alive. Stay with me. Stay long enough to get out." He had not spoken like that in years. Not softly. Not to anything. The widening hit them all at once. The shepherd scrambled higher and planted itself crosswise below him, body acting like a wedge against the flow. They had maybe 10 seconds. Maybe less. The new surge arrived around the bend before he even had time to fully breathe. The pup made the faintest sound, a fractured whimper from somewhere deep under shock. That small sound did something dangerous inside him. It made this no longer about instinct or detached rescue. It made it personal. The kind of personal that gets people killed if it outruns discipline. He forced himself to breathe once, deep and deliberate, then scan high, low, left, right. That was when he saw the cable. At first he thought it was a trick of water and shadow, a dark line cutting across the canyon wall 20 feet downstream and about 4 feet above the current. Then lightning flashed somewhere beyond the rim, whitening the sky for an instant, and the line came clear, steel, old but intact, anchored into the limestone on one side and disappearing around a jut of rock on the other. Not natural. Human. Maybe the remains of an old climbing traverse. Maybe part of some maintenance system from decades back. Whatever it had once been, it was now the only object in sight not moving under the flood. It represented possibility, and possibility was enough. The problem was distance. To reach it they would have to re-enter the main current, drift with the surge for several seconds, and hit the wall at exactly the right point. Miss, and they would be pushed into the chute beyond the bend. Go too high, impossible. Too low, they'd be smashed against submerged stone. With only himself, maybe he could risk it. With the pup in one arm and the shepherd depending on his line, the margin collapsed almost to nothing. But the slab beneath him shuddered as the first fingers of the incoming surge clawed around it, making the decision for him. He shifted the pup, tucking it under his jacket as much as possible, trapping it between chest and forearm for warmth and security. The little body was shock cold. Its ears lay flat, eyes half closed, but it still breathed. Good. Good enough. He looked at the shepherd and spoke with the clipped certainty of old operations, the tone he had once sworn never to use again because of what it awakened in him. On me? The dog's gaze sharpened further. It understood command structure the way some men understand prayer. The slab hit with the full surge. Water exploded over them in a brown, battering sheet. The impact tore his left hand loose, then nearly the right. He did not wait for the second hit. He shoved off hard, taking the force before it could take him, and the flood grabbed them like thrown stones. For 2 heartbeats they were not swimming so much as surviving inside movement too big to control. The wall streaked past on his right. The cable flashed into view ahead. He kicked once, twice, using the flood's own speed to steer instead of stall. The shepherd surfaced beside him and vanished under spray. The cable came closer. Too close. He had one chance. He released his hold on the wall current and lunged upward. His hand caught steel. The shock of it nearly dislocated his shoulder. The cable hummed under strain, slick with moss and years of neglect, but it held. The flood swung his whole body downstream in a brutal arc. The pup slammed into his chest, he curled around it instinctively. His boots crashed the wall and pain burst through both shins. The shepherd leaped, jaws snapping not at the cable but at the frayed remnant of a hanging strap attached to it. For one impossible second all 3 of them were suspended between drowning and traction, penduluming in a curtain of muddy spray while the canyon tried to rip them free. He wrapped one arm around the cable and hauled hand over hand toward the anchor point, each movement an act of violence against numbed muscles. The shepherd gained its footing on a submerged knob of rock, then climbed higher, using the strap and the wall together. The pup made no sound now. That terrified him more than the water. He turned his face down once, just enough to see the small muzzle pressed against his chest, eyes closed, body limp except for the faintest movement at the ribs. Alive. Barely. He climbed faster. The anchor point was a rusted ring sunk into the stone beside a sloping shelf scarcely wider than a coffin lid. He dragged himself onto it and immediately turned to the shepherd, grabbing the scruff behind its neck harness and heaving as the dog kicked off the wall with its back legs. Together they crashed onto the shelf in a tangle of mud, fur, steel, and breathless strain. The surge they had outrun thundered below them, slamming through the channel with enough force to rip the entire slab zone clean. If they had stayed there the pup trembled under that touch but did not pull away. Below them, the flood continued its blind assault through the canyon, but up on the shelf the world shrank to breath, heartbeat, wet fur, and stone. It should have been enough to stay still for a minute, maybe 2. But as his vision steadied and his hearing adapted beyond the roar of the current, he noticed something that had not been there before. A sound. Not water. Not thunder. A sharp, metallic clink from farther up the shelf, somewhere beyond the bend of rock just above them. The shepherd heard it too. Its head came up instantly, ears forward, body rigid despite exhaustion. Another clink. Then a scrape. Rainwater streamed down over its edge. The old cable they had used disappeared into that recess as well, suggesting it had once led somewhere. A route. A station. A platform. Or something else entirely. He stared into the shadow while the shepherd gave a low, warning growl that vibrated against the stone. Then lightning flashed again across the strip of sky above. For a fraction of a second the recess lit up. And in that white, brutal instant, he saw that they were not alone. For a split second the lightning turned the recess into a photograph burned onto the inside of his mind, all hard edges and impossible detail, and what it revealed did not belong in any story that should have ended with a simple rescue. The cable vanished into a narrow cut in the limestone, and beside that cut stood the rusted frame of an old maintenance platform bolted into the rock, half collapsed, half hidden under years of mineral stain and runoff. A section of metal grating hung crooked over open air. A weather-beaten pulley assembly leaned at an angle where the cable once must have run under tension. And just behind it, barely visible before darkness slammed shut again, was the outline of a door set into the canyon wall. Not a cave opening shaped by nature. Not a random pocket in the stone. A door. Steel. Human-made. Old enough to be forgotten, intact enough to still exist. But that was not what sent a colder kind of shock through him. What he had also seen in that single flash, standing just to the side of the broken platform, was movement, low, still, deliberate movement, and two pale reflections that had snapped back the lightning like glass. Eyes. Another animal. Maybe. Or something else hiding in the shadow of the doorway while floodwater raged below and the canyon tried to bury all evidence that anyone had ever built anything here at all. Darkness returned hard and total. Rain ticked on the rock shelf around them. The flood boomed beneath. The German shepherd's growl deepened, not loud, not reckless, but focused in that way which meant it was no longer merely alert, it had identified a living presence and was waiting for it to declare intent. The man drew one slow breath and forced his body still, because stillness often gave more information than movement ever could. The Labradoodle Pup shivered violently under his hand, its soaked curls plastered flat, every breath a fragile scrape. He kept one palm across the pup's ribs, feeling the weak but steady rise and fall while his eyes adjusted toward the recess again. Nothing moved at first. Only dark shapes layered inside darker shapes. Water streamed down the canyon wall like black ribbons in the stormlight. Somewhere high above, thunder rolled across the rim. Then came the metallic scrape again, brief but distinct, as if something had shifted weight on the platform and brushed rusted steel by mistake. He eased the pup closer against his chest and slowly pushed himself upright into a crouch. His muscles protested immediately. Cold had set hooks in them. His shoulders burned from the cable traverse, his left shin pulsed where it had slammed the wall, and his hands were raw from limestone and steel. None of that mattered. Pain could be sorted later. Right now the only question was whether whatever occupied that recess represented danger, shelter, or some complicated mix of both. The shepherd rose with him, fur slick against its ribs, body angled half in front of him without blocking his line of sight. Good dog, he thought, though the words stayed behind his teeth. It had become a habit, talking to the dog internally rather than aloud, as if naming gratitude risked making it too visible, too human. Tonight the distance felt thinner. Lightning did not come again right away, so he had to work with what the storm gave him: irregular glow from the cloud deck overhead, reflected spray from the flood below, and sound. He listened hard. It made him answer the world, even when the world was only weather and trail and the slow loneliness of mornings that began before sunrise. Tonight that bond was no abstraction. It had already saved all three of them more than once. The pup coughed weakly again. He looked down. Mud crusted the tiny muzzle. No human voice calling from anywhere in the canyon. That absence gnawed at him now more than it had during the rescue. Dogs do not simply arrive in a flood chute inside a narrow canyon by accident, not usually, and especially not a pup this young. Someone had been with it. Or had been with it recently. Unless the storm had already taken them. He pushed that thought away because it offered nothing he could act on. The living came first. The recess above remained silent. He scanned the route to it. The rock shelf narrowed after 15 feet, rising at a slight angle toward the broken platform. Water runoff crossed it in a slick sheen. On the outside edge, the shelf dropped directly into the flood, no margin, no second step if a boot slipped. The old cable reappeared higher up, threaded through a warped guide wheel near the platform and anchored beside the doorway. The platform itself was more a suggestion than a surface, some sections intact, others rusted through or bent downward. But the rock immediately beside it looked climbable if he used the cable and the wall together. It would be difficult carrying the pup. Harder with the shepherd at heel. Still possible. Staying where they were was not. He could feel the shelf subtly shudder every time a stronger surge passed below. Erosion never announced exactly when it was finished with a ledge. It simply finished. Easy. The word came out quiet and rough. The dog flicked one ear back to him, then forward again, eyes never leaving the recess. He moved 1 foot at a time, slow enough that runoff did not splash, and began edging upslope. The pup stayed tucked inside his jacket, one small head exposed near his collarbone, blinking weakly at the rain. Every step required deliberate placement. The limestone was slick as bone. His right boot found a shallow divot, his left tested the next. The shepherd flowed beside him with astonishing control, claws finding purchase where his soles sometimes barely did. When they reached the first narrowing, he flattened his free palm against the wall and used friction to steady himself. The flood below blasted up cold spray that coated his face, carrying the taste of mud and old minerals. The whole canyon smelled like wet stone and uprooted earth. Halfway to the platform, another flash of lightning tore across the sky. This one lasted longer, a branching white glare that filled the canyon with savage clarity. He saw the recess. Saw the platform. Saw the steel door, streaked with rust and mineral runoff, an old wheel handle fixed at the center. Saw a yellow warning placard so faded the letters were almost gone. Saw bones too, small ones, likely birds or rodents, caught in a corner of the grating where flood spray had never reached enough to wash them away. And he saw the eyes again, lower now, closer to the floor of the platform. Not one set. Two. Darkness returned. The shepherd's lips lifted soundlessly. The man stopped moving. 2 sets of eyes meant not a hidden mountain cat, not some lone coyote pushed into odd terrain by weather. Smaller spacing. Lower profile. Dogs, most likely. Or one dog and one unknown. He stood completely still for several breaths. Then from the recess came a sound so soft he nearly mistook it for the whine of the cable in the wind. A whimper. High. Young. Another. Then, from a little farther back, a rougher sound, older, guarded, exhausted. His whole focus shifted. Puppies. The realization changed the shape of the problem at once. Not a threat in the predatory sense, though a frightened adult animal protecting young could still be dangerous enough. More importantly, it answered the unease that had been building since he first saw the Labradoodle. This wasn't one dog in the wrong place. This was a chain. There were more animals up there, somehow trapped in or around that old structure. Maybe washed in by a previous surge. Maybe abandoned before the storm. Maybe connected to whoever had lost the Labradoodle. None of the possibilities were good. All of them meant the night had just become bigger. He resumed climbing, slower now, body angled to present less threat as he approached the platform. The shepherd mirrored the change without needing to be told, lowering its head slightly, easing the stiffness out of its shoulders just enough to appear less confrontational while remaining ready. When they reached the base of the rusted frame, he paused and listened again. The smaller whimpers had gone silent. The rougher breathing remained. He could hear claws shift faintly on metal. Smell came next, delivered by a turn in the wind, wet fur, fear, infection, and something stale, enclosed, old. Not fresh den scent. Confinement scent. Animals that had been in one place too long. He tested the grating with one boot. It groaned but held. Rust flaked away under the tread and vanished into the dark water below. He transferred only part of his weight, then more. Still held. The shepherd stepped onto the rock brace beside the grating rather than the metal itself, preferring the more stable route. Smart again. He moved onto the platform one careful pace at a time until the door stood 3 feet in front of him, black and featureless except for the wheel handle and the scarred paint. Up close he could read the ghost of the placard under his fingers, restricted access. Flood Control Service Tunnel. The lettering had once been red on white. Time had nearly erased it, but not enough. Flood control. He stared at the door and the forgotten engineering of it all clicked into shape. Long ago someone had built channels, gates, inspection routes through these canyon walls, perhaps to divert runoff, monitor flash flood behavior, protect a downstream road or settlement. Then funding vanished, routes changed, bureaucracy swallowed the place, and the canyon reclaimed what people abandoned. But the tunnel remained. And if the tunnel was even partly intact, it might mean shelter from the storm, higher ground, maybe another exit route. It also explained the cable. It explained the platform. It did not explain the animals. A low rumble came from behind a stack of fallen conduit to the right of the doorway. Defensive, warning, female maybe, hard to tell under strain and echo. He crouched slightly and turned his shoulders sideways, making himself smaller. "It's all right," he said, feeling almost foolish the instant the words were spoken because frightened animals did not trust language. Tone mattered more. Calm mattered more. He kept his eyes soft, not locked directly, and let the Labradoodle Pup's head show from his jacket. If there was a mother here, maybe the sight and scent of another pup would shift something. There was movement behind the conduit, then a body emerged inch by inch from shadow. A mixed-breed dog, medium-sized, tan once but now dark with rain and canyon grime, one ear torn at the tip, ribs visible under soaked fur, front leg favoring the paw. Her eyes flashed toward him and then instantly toward the pup in his jacket. She stiffened, every muscle tightening. Behind her, 3 smaller shapes huddled in the doorway recess itself, 2 little dark-coated pups and 1 lanky adolescent dog too old to be fully dependent and too young to be on its own. All of them were starving-eyed, trembling, exhausted. None wore collars. None looked like they had been here by choice. The adult's muzzle showed scratches. One flank was smeared with dried blood, not fresh but recent enough to matter. The shepherd held like carved stone, though he could feel the tension in it like a drawn wire. A frightened mother could charge. A starving animal could do anything if cornered. He slid 1 foot back, not retreating exactly, just making room. The adult dog gave another low warning, then took a single step toward him and lifted her nose into the rain, scenting the Labradoodle. Not hers. That much was obvious. Yet the reaction was not rejection. It was confusion, then a kind of reluctant concern. The rescued pup smelled like flood, fear, near death. Those scents cut across pack lines. He remembered a village years ago, far from here, after a raid had broken everything open. Dust. Smoke. Civilians emerging from hidden corners. A child carrying a chicken like it was treasure. Another child trying to wake a dog that would never rise. Strange what memory chooses to preserve. Strange what returns when weather and danger strip a man back to the bone. He pushed the thought down. This was not then. These were not those losses. These lives were still within reach. He slowly unzipped his jacket farther and lowered the Labradoodle enough for the tan dog to see it clearly. The little pup gave a weak, miserable whine. The adult dog's ears twitched. She stepped forward again, then stopped when the shepherd shifted his weight by an inch. Protective. Rightly so. The man put 2 fingers lightly against the shepherd's shoulder to steady the line. Easy. Again the dog obeyed. The tan female looked from the shepherd to him to the pup and back, calculating the same thing he was, whether conflict was worth the cost. Her body language changed by degrees. The raised fur flattened a little. The growl faded to a strained breath. She was done fighting if she had another option. That was when he noticed the chain. It was half hidden beneath runoff and rust near the wall bracket beside the door, clipped to a broken ring bolt. The free length dragged toward the tan dog's back leg and vanished under her soaked fur. He narrowed his eyes, leaned slightly, and saw it properly. Not attached now, but once attached. The snap hook was twisted open. One section of chain was broken, metal stretched and whitened at the stress point. She had been tethered here. Recently enough that the broken end hadn't even fully oxidized. The pups must have been trapped with her when the storm came. Someone had left them on a maintenance platform above a flood canyon, chained to a wall, beside a sealed tunnel door. Rage moved through him so quietly it was almost colder than the water had been. He did not often feel anger anymore. Not the useful kind. Mostly there had only been numbness, fatigue, and that dull guilt which corrodes every bright emotion from the inside. But this was different. Deliberate cruelty always cut through fog. Some person had done this. Some human hand had clipped metal to flesh or collar and walked away. Maybe before the storm, maybe because of the storm, maybe expecting the canyon to erase the evidence. The idea sat inside him like a blade. The door behind the trapped dogs shuddered. Not from them. From within. Everyone reacted at once. The tan female spun toward it with a bark that cracked under exhaustion. The pup scattered deeper into the recess. The shepherd snapped its head toward the handle, body dropping into a ready crouch. The man's pulse spiked and every old instinct surged awake, assessing entry point, threats, angles, movement. The wheel handle trembled slightly, then stopped. Rain ticked across the metal. Flood roared below. For a second the canyon seemed to hold its breath. Then from behind the steel door came a sound so faint, so hoarse, so nearly lost under the storm, he almost doubted it was real. A human cough. He stared at the door, the meaning of it landing in pieces too fast and too heavy. The abandoned dogs. The chained mother. The Labradoodle swept into the flood. The hidden service tunnel. And now someone on the other side of the steel, alive enough to make sound but too weak, trapped, or injured to open it. The entire night rearranged itself around that fact. This had never been only a rescue. It was the aftermath of something else, something the storm had uncovered rather than caused. He stepped closer to the door and pressed his ear to the cold metal, ignoring the rust flaking against his cheek. For a moment there was nothing but the deep boom of water transmitted through stone. Then it came again, a cough, closer this time, followed by a faint dragging noise and what might have been a hand striking metal once, weakly. The shepherd let out a low, urgent sound in its throat. The tan female dog backed away from the door with her tail tucked, eyes wide. One of the small pups cried from the recess. The man gripped the wheel handle and tried it. It did not move. Either locked, jammed, or pressure sealed by years of disuse and sediment. He set the Labradoodle carefully onto the driest patch of grating he could find and stripped off his gloves for better purchase. His fingers, pale and numb from cold, closed around the iron wheel. He braced one boot against the doorframe and pulled. Nothing. He reversed direction, shoved with all the torque his shoulders could produce. Rust grated. The wheel shifted less than an inch and stopped hard. Not impossible, then. Just stuck. He looked around quickly for leverage. The platform offered little except a broken length of conduit and the cable anchor. The conduit was half-bent but solid steel. He jammed it through one of the wheel spokes to create a longer lever arm and tried again, putting his entire body into the motion. The old mechanism shrieked in protest. The sound echoed wildly through the canyon. The tan female flinched. The shepherd held position at the side of the platform, scanning both the ledge and the darkness below, as if understanding this kind of vulnerability required perimeter as much as brute force. The wheel moved another fraction, then locked again. From inside the tunnel came a rasping voice, too weak to make out words. "Hold on," he said, before he could stop himself. A ridiculous promise. Still he meant it. He reset his stance, every muscle in his back and arms tightening, and drove down on the conduit with everything the cold had not stolen. Rust flaked in red bursts. The wheel shuddered. Somewhere inside the mechanism something cracked loose with a sound like bone. The handle spun suddenly a quarter turn, nearly throwing him off balance. He caught himself against the frame and felt the seal break along the door edge with a wet sucking groan. Stale air breathed out from the tunnel, cold, mineral heavy, tinged with diesel, mold, blood, and human confinement. He did not like that smell. Not at all. The gap widened half an inch on its own, then stuck again. But through that half inch he saw darkness shaped by concrete rather than stone, and on the floor just beyond the threshold, a hand. Human. Mud-smeared. Barely moving. He dropped the conduit and wedged his fingers into the gap, hauling while he kicked at the lower edge to break whatever sediment had welded it shut. The door opened another inch. Another. And somewhere deeper inside that tunnel, beyond the broken door and the chained dogs and the flood and the storm, waited the reason why the smell coming from the tunnel was wrong in a way that cut deeper than anything the storm had thrown at them, a stale mixture of damp concrete, old oil, human sweat left too long without air, and something metallic that clung to the back of the throat like dried. It was the kind of smell that spoke of confinement, of time spent where time shouldn't have been allowed to pass, of spaces meant to be temporary that had turned into something else entirely. The man held the door open just enough to widen the gap another inch, his fingers numb and slick with rust and rain as he forced the ancient seal to give way piece by piece. The steel groaned again, louder this time, echoing through the canyon like a warning that whatever had been locked behind it was not meant to be disturbed. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Not after seeing that hand. Not after recognizing the marks carved into the skin where rope had once bitten deep enough to leave memory behind. The German Shepherd shifted position without being told, stepping slightly forward and lowering its body, placing itself between the opening and the rest of the platform, as if instinctively creating a line that separated the known danger outside from the unknown threat within. Its ears were forward, every muscle coiled again, but this time its attention was split, one part fixed on the darkness inside the tunnel, the other scanning the canyon behind them. It understood something fundamental that most people never did: danger rarely came from only one direction. The tan female dog backed further into the recess, her pups clustering tightly against her legs, their small bodies pressed together for warmth and safety. She watched the man with wary, uncertain eyes, torn between fear and the fragile possibility that he was not another threat. Her breathing was fast, uneven, but she did not growl again. She had seen enough to know that survival, at least for now, depended on staying still. The man forced the door wider. Another inch. Then another. Until finally, with a heavy grinding sound, the steel shifted just enough to allow him to wedge his shoulder into the gap and push with his full weight. The resistance broke in a sudden, violent release, and the door swung inward several inches more, revealing a narrow, sloping corridor carved into the rock, reinforced with old concrete panels that had cracked and stained over time. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, forming thin streams that ran along the edges of the passage and disappeared into darkness below. The air inside was colder than outside, unnaturally still compared to the chaos of the storm, as if the tunnel existed in a separate world where the flood could not reach, but something else had taken its place. He crouched immediately, one hand reaching forward to grasp the wrist of the figure on the floor. The skin was cold, but not lifeless. A pulse, faint, irregular, but there. Alive. The arm twitched weakly under his grip, fingers curling slightly as if responding to contact. He leaned closer, peering into the darkness, trying to make out more than just the outline of a body lying partially in the doorway. Rainlight barely reached this far, but it was enough to reveal a face turned sideways against the wet concrete, streaked with dirt and exhaustion. No clear features. No identity. Only the unmistakable signs of someone who had been here too long. Behind him, the Labradoodle Pup let out a small, broken whine. The sound echoed strangely inside the tunnel, carrying deeper than expected, bouncing off unseen walls and returning distorted. The man froze for a fraction of a second, listening. There. Something else. A shift in the darkness beyond. Subtle. Controlled. Not the random movement of debris or water. Something aware. His grip tightened instinctively on the injured person's wrist. The shepherd reacted instantly, stepping forward with a low, sharp growl that cut through the stillness like a blade. Its eyes locked onto the deeper part of the tunnel, its body angled now not just in defense, but in warning. The man felt it too. That familiar shift. The same one he had known years ago in places far from this canyon. The moment when a situation stopped being uncertain, and became dangerous. He slowly lifted his head, eyes narrowing as he tried to pierce the darkness beyond the fallen figure. The tunnel sloped downward, disappearing into a blackness that swallowed light completely. Water dripped steadily, creating a rhythmic pattern that almost masked everything else. Almost. But not entirely. Because beneath that steady drip, there was breathing. Not the weak, broken breath of the person at his hand. Deeper. Stronger. Deliberate. Someone else was inside. Watching. Waiting. The realization settled over him with cold precision. This wasn't just a place where someone had been trapped. This was a place where someone still was. He shifted his weight slightly, pulling the injured person just enough to bring their upper body fully out of the doorway, creating a clearer line of sight into the tunnel while also protecting them from whatever lay deeper inside. The movement triggered a weak reaction, a soft groan, barely audible, but enough to confirm that consciousness still lingered somewhere beneath the exhaustion. "Stay with me," he said quietly, though he knew the words might not reach. Behind him, the shepherd's growl deepened. The tan female dog gave a short, anxious bark, then fell silent again. The canyon roared. The storm pressed down. And inside the tunnel, something moved. A faint scrape against concrete. A shift of weight. Then stillness again. The man's mind worked fast, faster than it had in years, assembling possibilities, assessing risk, calculating outcomes. The person in front of him was injured, restrained at some point, possibly held here. The dogs outside had been chained. The tunnel was old, forgotten, hidden. And now, in the middle of a storm that should have driven everyone away, there was still someone inside. That meant intent. That meant control. That meant this wasn't over. He glanced once toward the shepherd, and in that brief exchange, everything passed between them without words. The dog adjusted its stance, lowering its center of gravity, preparing for whatever came next. The man released the injured person's wrist carefully and shifted his position, placing himself between them and the darkness inside the tunnel. He leaned forward slightly, voice steady, controlled. "I know you're there." The words disappeared into the black. No immediate response. Only the drip of water. The echo of the storm. Then, a voice. Low. Rough. Barely more than a whisper. "You shouldn't have opened that door." The air inside the tunnel seemed to tighten around the sound, as if even the space itself reacted to it. The man didn't move. Didn't respond. But inside, something old and sharp came fully awake. Because that voice wasn't afraid. And in a place like this, that made it far more dangerous than the storm outside. The shepherd stepped forward half a pace, teeth just visible now, a silent promise that whatever emerged from that darkness would not meet them unchallenged. The injured person stirred again, a faint, desperate movement of their hand against the concrete. And deeper inside the tunnel, there was another sound. Not movement this time. Not breathing. A metallic click. Small. Controlled. Deliberate. The kind of sound that meant something had just been readied. And whatever it wasn't meant for rescue. It was meant for something else entirely. The metallic click did not echo the way the dripping water did. It was tight, contained, absorbed by the concrete walls as if the tunnel itself understood the weight of that sound and refused to give it back. The man did not flinch, but every part of him registered it instantly. He had heard that kind of sound before in places where mistakes didn't get second chances. It could have been many things, a latch, a mechanism, a tool, but his instincts did not lean toward harmless explanations. They leaned toward preparation. Toward intent. Toward something waiting to act. He shifted his stance just enough to anchor his footing against the slick threshold, one shoulder angled toward the opening, one arm free, the other ready to pull the injured person fully clear if needed. His breathing slowed, deliberate, controlled, not because he wasn't feeling the pressure of the moment, but because he was. And control was the only thing that kept moments like this from collapsing into chaos. The German Shepherd moved forward another inch, not breaking the invisible line between platform and tunnel, but claiming it. Its growl lowered further, vibrating through its chest like distant thunder, steady and focused, not wild. Its eyes had adjusted to the darkness faster than his, pupils wide, scanning the black corridor with a clarity he did not yet have. It saw more. It always did. That was something he had learned early on: trust what the dog sees before you see it. Trust what the dog feels before you understand it. The man leaned slightly closer to the opening, eyes narrowing as he forced himself to see beyond the first few feet of darkness. The tunnel floor sloped downward at a shallow angle, slick with water and grime. Faint outlines of old piping ran along one wall, corroded and broken in places. Further in, the darkness thickened, swallowing detail completely. But there, just at the edge of perception, something shifted again. Not fast. Not sudden. Controlled. A silhouette. Low. Crouched. Watching. You shouldn't have opened that door. The voice came again, clearer this time, though still rough, worn down by time and strain. It carried no panic. No urgency. Only a quiet certainty that settled uncomfortably in the space between them. The kind of voice that didn't belong to someone trapped without options. The kind of voice that belonged to someone who believed they still had control. The man let the silence stretch for a moment before responding, his tone level, steady. Someone in here needs help. No accusation. No challenge. Just a statement. A pause followed. Long enough to feel deliberate. Then a soft, almost humorless sound from within the tunnel. Not quite a laugh. Not quite disbelief. Something in between. Help, the voice said, low and uneven. You think that's what this is? Another shift in the darkness. The silhouette moved slightly, just enough for a faint glint to catch what little light reached that far. Metal. Small. Held low. Not pointed directly, yet, but present. The shepherd's growl sharpened instantly. The man felt the tension spike, but he didn't move forward. Didn't escalate. Not yet. Instead, he spoke again, quieter now. There are dogs out here. Chained. Injured. Someone left them. The words hung in the air. This time, the reaction was different. The silhouette stilled completely. Even the breathing seemed to pause for a second. Then, a shift. Inside the tunnel, the figure moved again, stepping slightly closer, not enough to reveal fully, but enough to change the space between them. The glint of metal shifted with it. You don't understand what you walked into, the voice said, quieter now, less certain, but still guarded. This place, it's not what you think. The man's eyes flicked briefly to the injured person at his feet. Rope marks. Exhaustion. Fear. Then back into the darkness. Then explain it. A longer silence followed. The kind that stretched thin. The kind that could break either way. Eyes sunken but alert. Clothes dark, soaked, stained. The object in hand, small, metallic, cylindrical, held loosely but ready. Not a gun. Something else. The man's mind processed it instantly. Tool. Trigger. Device. Unknown. Dangerous. The injured person at his feet stirred again, a weak groan escaping their lips. The figure's head snapped toward the sound. And in that single, unguarded moment, everything changed. Because the expression that flickered across that shadowed face was not control. Not confidence. Not dominance. It was fear. Real. Immediate. and directed not at the man, not at the dog, but at something deeper inside the tunnel. The figure took a half step back instinctively. The metal object tightened in their grip. Too late, they whispered. The words barely carried over the storm. But the shepherd heard them. The man felt them. And then, from somewhere deeper in the tunnel, a new sound emerged. Not breathing. Not movement. Something heavier. Dragging. Slow. Deliberate. Getting closer. The air inside the corridor shifted again, colder somehow, thicker, carrying a different kind of weight now. The figure's composure cracked completely. They're awake, they said, voice breaking for the first time. The man didn't ask who. Didn't need to. Because the sound coming from the darkness was not one. It was many. And whatever was coming was far worse than anything the storm had thrown at them so far. The dragging sound grew clearer with each passing second, no longer something imagined or half-heard beneath the storm, but a distinct, layered movement echoing through the tunnel like something pulling itself forward with effort and purpose. It wasn't fast. It wasn't chaotic. That was what made it worse. Slow movement meant control. It meant awareness. It meant whatever was inside that darkness knew exactly where it was going, and why. The man felt his pulse settle into a cold, focused rhythm, the kind that came not from panic but from recognition. This was no longer just a rescue. This was an unfolding situation with too many unknowns and not enough time. The German shepherd shifted again, stepping fully into the threshold now, placing itself between the man and the tunnel with absolute certainty. Its growl rose, not louder, but deeper, more resonant, vibrating through its entire frame as its eyes locked into the darkness ahead. It wasn't reacting to fear. It was reacting to threat. There was a difference, and the dog understood it instinctively. Behind them, the storm hammered down harder, the flood below surging violently as another wave of water crashed through the canyon. The platform trembled under the impact, rusted metal creaking, stone vibrating faintly beneath their feet. The tan female dog began pacing in tight, frantic circles within the recess, her pups whining softly as they pressed closer together. She could feel it too. Every living thing on that ledge now shared the same understanding. Something was coming. The figure inside the tunnel backed up another step, eyes wide now, no longer hiding behind control or distance. The metal object in their hand shook slightly, no longer steady. You don't have time, they said, voice cracking under pressure. You need to leave. Now. The man didn't move. Didn't step back. Didn't even shift his stance. Instead, he lowered his voice, calm and deliberate. Who's in there? The question hung in the air for a fraction of a second. Then the answer came. Not from the figure. From the darkness itself. A low, broken sound. Half growl. Half gasp. Human. But wrong. The man's jaw tightened. Infection. Exhaustion. Starvation. Something had happened down there. Something that had turned people into this. The dragging sound grew louder now, closer, accompanied by irregular breathing, ragged, uneven, but numerous. Not one. Not two. Several. The figure shook their head quickly, backing up again. They're not right, they whispered. They've been down there too long, something happened, they changed. The shepherd's growl sharpened instantly. The man's eyes flicked briefly to the injured person at his feet, then back into the tunnel. Everything was aligning now. The chained dogs. The hidden tunnel. The trapped individual. The fear. This wasn't random. This was containment. Someone had put things here. Locked them away. And something had gone wrong. How many? He asked. The figure hesitated. Too long. Enough, they said finally. That was all he needed. The dragging sound became footsteps now, unsteady, uneven, scraping against concrete as something, or multiple things, approached the entrance. the faint outlines of movement began to form in the darkness, shifting shapes just beyond the edge of visibility. The shepherd stepped forward again. This time, not just ready. Prepared. The man moved quickly. He reached down and grabbed the injured person under the arms, pulling them fully out of the doorway and onto the platform with a single, controlled motion. The body was lighter than expected, weak, barely able to assist, but alive. "Stay with me," he said again, more firmly this time. No response. But the chest still moved. That was enough. Behind him, the Labradoodle Pup stirred weakly. The tan female dog barked once, sharp, warning. The storm roared. And inside the tunnel, the first figure emerged. Slowly. Dragging one leg behind. Head tilted unnaturally. Eyes open, but unfocused. Skin pale beneath grime, streaked with something darker. The movement was wrong. Uncoordinated. But persistent. Alive. Barely. Behind it. Another shape. Then another. The man's breathing slowed even further. Everything inside him narrowing to a single point of focus. Distance. Movement. Options. There weren't many. The platform was narrow. The canyon below was death. The tunnel behind them was worse. But the ledge they came from, that was still there. Dangerous. But possible. He made the decision instantly. "We move," he said, voice low but sharp. The shepherd didn't hesitate. It turned immediately, shifting from defense to motion, understanding the change in strategy without needing explanation. The man lifted the injured person again, adjusting their weight over his shoulder this time for better control. The Labradoodle Pup, he scooped it quickly, securing it against his chest once more. Too many lives. Too little time. Behind them, the first figure reached the doorway. Its head lifted slightly. And it made a sound. Not a growl. Not a voice. Something broken in between. The shepherd snapped its head back, teeth fully visible now. But it didn't attack. Because the man had already moved. He stepped off the platform. Back toward the narrow ledge. Back toward the storm. Because now, the storm was the safer option. The rain hit harder as they re-entered the open canyon, the cold immediate, brutal, but familiar. Behind them, the tunnel filled with movement. More figures reaching the entrance. More sounds echoing outward. More of them. The man didn't look back again. He didn't need to. Because the shepherd did. And the dog's reaction was enough. Urgent. Focused. Not panicked. But fast. Very fast. The ledge was slicker now, water running over it in sheets. The flood below louder than before. The canyon darker. Visibility dropping. But there was no hesitation. Only movement. Only survival. The tan female dog barked sharply again, gathering her pups. For a split second, she looked at the man. A choice. Stay. Or follow. The shepherd paused just long enough to glance back. A silent signal. Not command. Not force. Invitation. The female dog hesitated. Then, she moved. Grabbing one pup by the scruff. The others scrambling behind her. Following. Because even in chaos, instinct recognizes leadership. And right now, the only thing standing between them and whatever was coming out of that tunnel was a man who had once walked away from everything. And a dog who had never let him. Behind them, the first of the figures stepped onto the platform. Unsteady. Relentless. More behind it. The storm swallowed the sound as the man pushed forward along the ledge, every step a risk, every movement calculated. The canyon offered no mercy. But it offered space. And space meant a chance. The shepherd led now, moving with controlled urgency, finding paths through the slick stone, guiding without hesitation. The man followed, carrying weight that should have slowed him, but didn't. Because something inside him had fully awakened now. Not the past. Not the pain. Something else. Purpose. And as the storm raged around them and the darkness behind them grew louder, one thing became clear. They weren't just escaping anymore. They were being chased. The ledge felt narrower now, as if the canyon itself had decided to close in, to tighten its grip just when every step mattered most. Water streamed over the stone in thin, relentless sheets, turning solid ground into something treacherous, something alive beneath their feet. The man moved with controlled urgency, each step deliberate, each shift of weight calculated down to instinct, because there was no room left for error. The injured body over his shoulder hung heavy, unresponsive except for faint, uneven breaths that brushed against his neck, a reminder that time was not just against them, it was running out. The Labradoodle Pup pressed weakly against his chest, barely conscious, its small body cold even through the layers of soaked fabric. Behind him, the sound of movement from the platform did not fade. It grew. The broken, dragging footsteps multiplied, echoing out into the canyon now, mixing with the roar of the flood until it became something unnatural, something that didn't belong in the open air. The shepherd moved ahead with precision, never slipping, never hesitating, its body low, muscles flowing with each step as it navigated the slick terrain like it had known this path its entire life. But even it moved faster now. Not panicked, but urgent. It understood what was behind them. The tanned female dog struggled at first, her injured leg slowing her pup scrambling clumsily around her feet, slipping, whining softly as they tried to keep up. But survival overrode everything. She pushed forward, grabbing one pup, then dropping it to urge another along, her instincts driving her through fear and exhaustion. The man glanced back once, just once, long enough to confirm they were following. That was enough. He didn't slow. Couldn't slow. Because the canyon gave no second chances, and whatever was coming out of that tunnel was not something he wanted to face on a ledge barely wide enough for one person to stand. A sudden crash echoed from behind. Metal against stone. Then a heavy impact. The man didn't need to turn to know what it was. The platform had given way. Or something had forced its way off it. The sound of bodies hitting the ledge, or missing it, was swallowed almost instantly by the flood below, but one thing was certain now. They were no longer contained. "They're out," the voice inside his head said, cold and clear. The shepherd reacted instantly, stopping for half a second, turning its head back, eyes locking onto something behind them that the man could not yet fully see. Its growl returned, not low this time, but sharp, warning, cutting through the storm like a signal. "Move faster." The man adjusted his grip on the injured person, tightening his hold, shifting weight to maintain balance as he increased speed. The ledge dipped slightly ahead, sloping downward toward a section where the rock curved inward, creating a brief narrowing before opening again. Water pooled there, deeper, faster, making the surface even more unstable. Dangerous. But necessary. He stepped into it without hesitation. Cold water surged around his boots, rising to his ankles, then higher, pushing sideways with surprising force. His footing slipped for a fraction of a second, but he recovered instantly, adjusting his stance, leaning into the wall, using his shoulder to absorb the pressure. The shepherd was already through, standing just beyond the narrow point, waiting, watching, guiding. Behind them, a figure appeared. Not fully. Not clearly. But enough. The canyon opened slightly ahead, the ledge widening just enough to allow faster movement, but the ground remained slick, uneven, broken by cracks and loose stone. The storm above intensified again, lightning flashing briefly, illuminating the entire canyon in stark white for a split second. And in that moment, he saw them. More than one. At least 3 shapes now on the ledge behind. Moving faster than before. Learning. Adapting. That changed everything. Because slow, broken movement could be outrun. But adapting movement? That was something else. The man's breathing remained controlled, but his mind accelerated, recalculating everything. Distance to safety. Unknown. Terrain ahead. Unstable. Pursuers. Increasing. Resources. Limited. Options. Narrowing. The shepherd veered slightly left, moving toward a section where the canyon wall jutted outward, creating a partial overhang. Beneath it, the rock rose higher above the floodline, offering a brief stretch of drier footing. The man followed immediately, trusting the dog's path without question. That trust had been built over time. Over silence. Over survival. And right now, it was the only thing keeping them moving forward. They reached the overhang, stepping into a shadowed section where the rain struck less directly, where the ground offered slightly more grip. The tan female dog and her pups caught up, collapsing briefly into the space, panting, shaking, eyes wide with fear. For a moment, just a moment, there was a chance to breathe. The man lowered the injured person carefully against the rock, checking their pulse again. Still there. Weak. But fighting. The Labradoodle pup stirred slightly, letting out a faint sound. Alive. The shepherd turned back toward the ledge. Watching. Waiting. The figures behind were closer now. Much closer. Their movements still uneven, but faster. Drawn by sound. By motion. By something deeper. The man stood again, ignoring the strain in his body, ignoring the cold that had settled into his muscles. There was no rest. Not here. Not now. He looked ahead. The canyon curved again in the distance, disappearing into darkness. But just before that, he saw something. Higher ground. A sloping section of rock leading upward, away from the flood line. Difficult. Steep. But possible. And more importantly, out of reach of whatever was coming behind them. He turned to the shepherd. The dog had already seen it. Already understood. Already decided. Without a word, they moved again. The climb was immediate. Steeper than it had looked. The rock slick with rain, the angle forcing him to use both legs and one free arm while balancing the injured weight over his shoulder and the pup against his chest. Every step burned. Every movement strained muscles already pushed beyond their limits. The tan female struggled behind, her pup slipping, scrambling, but refusing to stop. Behind them, the first of the figures reached the overhang. Its head tilted upward. Its body adjusting. Learning. Then, it started climbing. Not well. Not smoothly. But climbing. The man felt it then. Not just danger. Not just urgency. Something worse. This wasn't just escape anymore. This was a race. And for the first time, he wasn't sure they were ahead. The shepherd reached a higher ledge first, turning immediately to look down, positioning itself to assist, to guide, to protect. The man pushed harder, forcing his body upward, refusing to slow, refusing to fail. Because now, there was no margin left. No backup plan. No second route. Only one direction. Up. Away. Or lost. The storm raged. The canyon roared. And behind them, the distance was closing, the climb turned brutal within seconds, the slope steeper than it had appeared from below, the rock slick with rain and worn smooth by years of water carving its path downward. The man dug his boots in, searching for any edge, any fracture in the limestone that could hold his weight for even a fraction of a second. The injured body over his shoulder dragged him backward with every step, shifting unpredictably, forcing him to constantly adjust his balance. The Labradoodle pup pressed weakly against his chest, barely moving now, its breath shallow but still there, still fighting. The German shepherd reached the top of the first rise and turned instantly, positioning itself low, ready, watching both the climb and the ledge below in a constant split awareness that no human could maintain. The dog's focus never broke. Not once. Behind them, the figures had reached the base of the slope. Their movement was wrong, uneven, but determined. They slipped, fell, dragged themselves back up, their hands clawing at the wet rock, bodies jerking forward in broken bursts. But they were climbing. That was enough. The man didn't look long, but he saw enough to understand, distance was no longer their advantage. The gap was closing. And once these things reached stable ground, once they found footing that allowed full movement, the situation would shift again. He pushed harder. Every muscle in his body protested now. Cold had seeped deep into his joints, into his spine, into the places where strength turned into endurance and endurance began to fail. But something else carried him forward. Not memory. Not training. Something more immediate. Something that refused to let him stop while there were still lives depending on movement. The shepherd barked once, short, sharp, guiding him slightly to the right where the rock offered a narrow line of better grip. He adjusted instantly, trusting the signal, shifting his path without hesitation. His boot found purchase. Then another step. Then another. The tan female struggled below, her injured leg nearly giving out as she tried to push upward while guiding her pups. One slipped, scrambling helplessly for a moment before she turned, grabbing it by the scruff and forcing it upward with a low, desperate growl. The other pups followed blindly, driven by instinct more than understanding. They didn't know what chased them. They only knew they had to keep moving. The man reached the top of the first incline and pulled himself over the edge with a final surge of effort, collapsing forward onto the rough surface before immediately rolling to the side to make space. The shepherd stepped in close, steadying itself beside him, eyes locked downward again. No pause. No rest. Only confirmation. They weren't safe yet. Not even close. He pushed himself up again, dragging the injured person higher, repositioning them more securely across his back. The movement triggered a faint response, a weak, broken sound that barely escaped their lips, but it was enough to confirm they were still conscious somewhere beneath the exhaustion. He adjusted his grip again, tightening it. Stay alive, he muttered, more to himself than to them. Ahead, the terrain leveled slightly, forming a narrow ridge that cut along the canyon wall. It was still exposed, still slick, but it offered something the ledge hadn't. Speed. They moved again. The shepherd took the lead, moving along the ridge with controlled urgency, never too far ahead, always within reach, always checking back just enough to guide. The man followed, his steps heavier now, slower, but still precise. Behind them, the tan female reached the top of the incline, her pup scrambling over the edge after her. Then, a sound. Closer than before. Too close. He turned his head just enough to see, one of the figures had reached the top. Faster than the others. Stronger. Its movement less broken now, more coordinated, as if the climb had forced something into alignment. It pulled itself fully onto the ridge, head lifting, eyes locking forward. Not wandering. Not confused. Focused. The shepherd reacted instantly, spinning halfway around, teeth fully bared now, a deep, aggressive growl tearing from its chest. This was no longer a warning. This was a line. The man didn't stop moving. But his pace changed. Faster. More urgent. The ridge narrowed ahead, forcing them into single-file movement with no room for error. One slip here meant a fall directly into the flood below, where the current would finish what the climb had started. The wind picked up along the higher ground, cutting through the canyon, carrying rain sideways now, reducing visibility further. The storm wasn't fading. It was building. The injured person shifted again, their weight pulling unevenly, forcing him to compensate quickly to avoid losing balance. The Labradoodle pup made a faint sound, its body trembling slightly, still alive but fading fast. Every second mattered. The shepherd barked again, short, urgent, then surged forward slightly, guiding toward a break in the ridge ahead. A split. Two paths. One narrow and direct, hugging the canyon wall. The other slightly wider, but sloping downward again toward the flood line. The man didn't hesitate. He followed the shepherd. Higher ground. Always higher. Behind them, the figure closed distance. Not running. But moving with increasing efficiency. The others were coming too. Slower. But following. The gap shrank. Step by step. The ridge curved sharply, cutting out of sight around a jagged outcrop. The shepherd disappeared around it first, then reappeared almost instantly, barking louder this time. Different. Alert. Urgent. Warning. The man rounded the corner and stopped for half a second. Because the path ahead was gone. A section of the ridge had collapsed, leaving a gap of several feet between them and the continuation of the path beyond. Below, the flood surged violently through the canyon, the drop steep enough that falling would mean immediate impact with the water, and likely never resurfacing. No time to find another way. No space to retreat. Behind them, the first figure was nearly within reach. The shepherd moved instantly, stepping back, positioning itself for a jump. It didn't hesitate. Didn't calculate. It trusted. The dog leapt, clearing the gap cleanly, landing on the other side with a controlled slide before regaining footing and turning back immediately. Waiting. The man's mind calculated distance, weight, angle, risk. In less than a second. Too far for a normal step. Possible with momentum. But not with hesitation. He adjusted his grip on the injured person. Tightened his hold on the pup. Took one step back. Then ran forward. The edge came fast. Too fast. He pushed off with everything left in his legs. For a moment, there was nothing beneath him. Only air. Only storm. Only the sound of the flood below. Then, impact. Hard. His boot slammed into the opposite rock, slipping for a fraction of a second before catching just enough to hold. He dropped to one knee, absorbing the weight, pulling the injured body forward with him. The shepherd was there instantly, pressing against him, stabilizing, anchoring. They made it. Barely. He turned, just in time to see the figure reach the edge. It didn't stop. Didn't slow. It jumped. But not clean. Not controlled. Its footing slipped mid-air. Its body twisted, and then, it disappeared. The sound of impact was swallowed by the flood below. Gone. But the others were still coming. And now, the path ahead was even narrower. Even more dangerous. But one thing was clear. They had bought time. Only time. Nothing more. And in a storm like this, time was the most fragile thing of all. The ridge beyond the gap narrowed into something barely wide enough for a single footstep, forcing them into a relentless forward motion where stopping meant losing balance and losing balance meant falling straight into the raging flood below. The man didn't look down again. He couldn't afford to. Every ounce of focus stayed locked ahead, on the shepherd's movements, on the next foothold, on the next breath. The dog moved like it was born for this terrain, body low, muscles steady, each step placed with precision that came from instinct sharpened by survival. It paused only when necessary, glancing back just enough to guide, never long enough to slow. The wind tore through the canyon now, carrying sheets of rain sideways, stinging against exposed skin, blurring vision, turning every movement into a fight against both gravity and force. Behind them, the remaining figures reached the broken gap. The man didn't need to turn fully to know, they announced themselves through sound now. The scraping, dragging, climbing noise had changed. It was faster. Less broken. More coordinated. They had learned from the first fall. They would not repeat the same mistake. That realization pushed a cold urgency through him that went deeper than exhaustion. They were adapting. And adaptation meant they would not stop. The injured person over his shoulder shifted again, heavier now as their body slackened further, their weight pulling unevenly with every step. The man adjusted instinctively, tightening his grip, ignoring the burn in his arms and back that threatened to slow him down. The Labradoodle pup barely moved at all now, its small body still, breaths shallow and irregular. Time was slipping. He could feel it in the way its weight had changed, lighter, weaker, fading. "Stay with me," he muttered again, voice barely audible over the storm. The shepherd barked once, sharp, urgent, pulling his focus forward. The ridge dipped suddenly, forcing a quick descent before rising again toward a higher section of the canyon wall. The rock here was fractured, broken into uneven slabs that shifted slightly under pressure. Unstable. Dangerous. But it offered something the narrow ridge did not. Space to move faster. He took it. Stepping down carefully at first, then increasing speed as the terrain allowed, trusting his footing, trusting the dog's lead. The shepherd moved ahead, weaving through the fractured rock, choosing the safest line without hesitation. It didn't look back as often now. It didn't need to. The pace had changed. This was no longer guided movement. This was escape. The tan female dog followed behind, her pup struggling to keep up but driven forward by the same instinct that had kept them alive this long. She snapped lightly at one that lagged, forcing it forward, refusing to let it fall behind. Then, a sound behind them. Closer. Too close. The man turned his head just enough to confirm what he already knew. One of the figures had made the jump. Clean. It landed on the far side of the gap and didn't fall. Didn't stumble. It kept moving. Faster than before. The others followed. Not perfect. But improving. The gap that had bought them time was gone. The shepherd reacted immediately, increasing pace, pushing harder through the broken terrain, guiding toward the higher ground ahead. The man followed, every step now driven by urgency rather than caution. Slips happened, small ones, but he recovered instantly each time, refusing to let momentum break. The climb ahead was steep. Not vertical. But enough to slow them. The rock angled upward sharply, forcing him to use both legs and one arm again, balancing the injured body and the pup with controlled effort. The shepherd climbed first, finding paths through the rock, anchoring itself at key points, turning back to guide him through the hardest sections. Behind, the figures reached the fractured zone. And they didn't slow. They moved through it with growing coordination, bodies still damaged, still wrong, but functioning. Relentless. The man's breathing grew heavier now, controlled but strained, each inhale pulling cold air deep into his lungs, each exhale sharp and fast. His muscles burned, his grip tightened, his steps grew heavier, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because the higher ground ahead, that was the only chance left. The shepherd reached the top first, pulling itself onto a wide, sloping plateau carved into the canyon wall. It turned immediately, scanning, assessing, then barking sharply, twice. Different tone. Not warning. Direction. The man pushed the final stretch, forcing his body upward with everything left, pulling the injured person with him, dragging the last few feet before collapsing onto the plateau. Solid ground. Stable. For the first time since the canyon, they had space. Real space. He rolled onto his side, lowering the injured person carefully, checking their breathing again. Faint. But still there. The Labradoodle pup, barely moving. Still alive. The shepherd stood over them, body tense, eyes locked on the edge they had just climbed. Waiting. Seconds later, the first figure reached the base of the climb. It started upward immediately. No hesitation. No pause. The others followed. The man pushed himself up again. No rest. Not yet. He looked around quickly, scanning the plateau. Then, he saw it. A path. Not natural. Old. Faint. But there. Leading away from the canyon. Upward. Toward higher ground. Toward escape. But also, toward something else. Because the path wasn't random. It had been used before. Recently. Footprints. Faint. But visible in the wet dust and stone. Human. More than one. Leading away from the tunnel area. Leading somewhere. The man's mind locked onto it instantly. This wasn't over. This wasn't just survival anymore. There was something bigger here. Something organized. Something deliberate. He looked back once more. The figures were climbing. Closer than ever. No more barriers. No more gaps. Only distance. And distance was shrinking fast. He turned to the shepherd. The dog already understood. already moving, following the path. Without hesitation, the man lifted the injured person again, securing them over his shoulder, adjusted the pup against his chest, and moved. Because now, there was only one direction left. Forward. Into whatever waited beyond the canyon. And behind them, the chase had only just begun. The path climbed steadily away from the canyon, cutting through jagged stone and broken ground that shifted beneath every step, but compared to what lay behind them, it felt almost stable, almost forgiving. The storm still raged, rain driving hard across the exposed plateau, wind tearing through the open space with a force that threatened to push them off balance, yet it no longer felt like the enemy. The real danger was behind them now, closing, adapting, refusing to stop. The man pushed forward, his body beyond exhaustion, muscles trembling with each step, but still moving, still holding the injured weight over his shoulder, still protecting the fragile life pressed against his chest. The Labradoodle pup gave a faint, weak movement, barely noticeable, but enough. Still alive. Still fighting. The shepherd led ahead, its pace unwavering, following the faint human path with absolute certainty, as if it understood that this trail was no accident, that it led somewhere important, somewhere that held answers, or at least distance. Behind them, the figures reached the plateau. Their movement changed again. Less broken. More stable. The open ground gave them what they needed. Speed. The terrain shifted from solid rock to loose gravel and wet soil, making footing less predictable, more dangerous in a different way. Each step threatened to slide, to collapse under weight, forcing constant adjustment, constant awareness. The injured person shifted again, their body slack, barely responsive now, their breathing faint against the storm. Time was running out. A narrow passage between the boulders, barely visible from a distance, leading to a small depression carved into the earth behind them. Hidden. Defensible. The shepherd moved through first, scanning quickly, then turning back, signaling. The man stepped inside, lowering the injured person carefully into the shallow depression, shielding them from the wind and rain as much as possible. The tan female dog and her pups followed immediately, collapsing into the space, exhausted, shaking, but alive. The shepherd positioned itself at the entrance, body low, eyes fixed on the path they had just climbed. Waiting. The man dropped to one knee beside the injured person, checking their pulse again. Weak. Fading. He shifted to the Labradoodle pup, gently pulling it closer, rubbing its small body to generate warmth, to keep it conscious, to keep it fighting. Its eyes fluttered weakly, its breathing shallow but present. Stay, he said quietly. Not a command. A plea. Behind the rocks, the first figure appeared on the path. Then another. Then more. They moved slower now, scanning, searching, no longer blindly following but tracking. Learning. The shepherd's growl returned, low and controlled, warning but not revealing their exact position. The man's mind worked fast. Too many. Too close. No clear escape. But the terrain offered something. He looked around quickly, scanning the rocks, the ground, the slope above them. Then he saw it. A narrow drop behind the depression, partially hidden by loose stone and brush, leading downward into a steep but navigable slope that curved away from the main path. Not obvious. Not easy. But possible. And more importantly, out of sight. He turned to the shepherd. The dog met his gaze. Understood immediately. No hesitation. He shifted, lifting the injured person again despite the strain, securing them tightly. The Labradoodle pup he tucked deeper against his chest, shielding it from the cold wind. The tan female dog rose slowly, her body trembling but ready, her pups gathering close. The figures on the path moved closer. 10 steps away. Maybe less. One of them paused. Head turning slightly. Listening. The shepherd went still. Completely still. The storm covered them. For a second, it was enough. The man moved. Slow. Silent. He stepped backward into the hidden drop, lowering himself carefully, testing footing before committing weight. The slope was steep, loose, sliding under pressure, but it held. The shepherd followed instantly, maintaining position between the group and the path above. The female dog guided her pups down, struggling but determined. One step. Then another. The figures reached the rocks. Stopped. Silence. The man held his breath. The shepherd didn't move. The storm roared. Then, a sound. From above. Confused. Searching. They hadn't seen. Not yet. The man continued downward, faster now, using gravity, sliding carefully, controlling descent, keeping balance despite the weight he carried. The slope curved away from the plateau, leading toward a lower section of terrain where the canyon opened further, where the storm noise spread out, where tracking would be harder. Distance. They needed distance. They moved for what felt like minutes, but could have been seconds. Time blurred. The storm blurred everything. Until finally, the slope leveled. The ground steadied. The path behind them disappeared from view. The sounds above faded. The chase, broken. For now. The man stopped. Only for a moment. Long enough to lower the injured person again. Long enough to check the pup. Still breathing. Still alive. The shepherd stood close, no longer growling, but still alert, still watching, still ready. The tan female lay down with her pups, exhausted beyond movement, but safe. For now. The storm began to ease slightly, the rain softening, the wind losing its edge. The canyon behind them still roared, but distant now. Separated. The man sat back slowly, breathing hard, his body finally catching up with everything it had endured. He looked at the shepherd. The dog met his gaze. Steady. Unwavering. And in that moment, something shifted. Not in the storm. Not in the canyon. But inside him. The weight he had carried for so long, the silence, the distance, the part of himself he had buried, began to crack. Because tonight, he hadn't walked away. He hadn't hesitated. He hadn't chosen safety over action. He had moved. He had fought. He had saved. Not just the pup. Not just the stranger. But something inside himself he thought was already gone. The Labradoodle pup stirred weakly, pressing closer. Alive. The injured person breathed, faint, but steady. Alive. The shepherd remained at his side. Always had been. Always would be. And as the storm faded and the first hint of quiet returned to the land, one truth settled in with absolute clarity. Some battles don't end when you escape them. Some battles bring you back to life.